The thistle had been coming back into that field for 6 years. Every agronomist who walked it said the same thing. Spray it. Disc it under. Rotate a cash crop through, and starve the seed bank. The field was 104 acres of rolling ground in Barton County, Kansas. Good ground, or it had been, before a drainage problem in the northeast corner turned the low end into a weedy mess that the herbicide crews had been fighting since 2013. By the spring of 2019, the Canada thistle was in the bottom 20 acres solid. The musk thistle had started coming up the slope, and there was a strip of leafy spurge along the fence line on the east side that 3 different applicators had tried to kill with 3 different programs and had not managed to kill. Nobody who drove past that field saw anything but a problem. Every farmer in Barton County, Kansas, saw weeds. Every expert who looked at it saw the same flaw. They were all looking at the same flaw, and they were all wrong about what it was. Stories like this don't get told much anymore. If you grew up around people who worked with their hands and didn't say much about it, hit subscribe. We're going to keep telling them as long as you keep watching. Her name was Cora Hettinga. She was 47 years old in the spring of 2019, and she had been farming in Barton County since she married into the ground in 2001. Her husband Dale farmed the row crop side, milo winter wheat, some corn in the better years, and Cora had taken the livestock end, starting with a small cow-calf operation she had built up to 31 Angus pairs before she sold down to a manageable dozen in 2015, when Dale's health had made the workload something that needed trimming. She had moved to goats in 2017, not because she had planned to, because a neighbor was getting out and the price on the animals was right, and because Cora had grown up around goats in Reno County, 60 miles east, and understood them in a way she had never quite gotten around to articulating. She did not come into the weedy field with a plan. That is the part of the story that people have trouble believing when they hear it, and it is the part that most need saying. She came into it sideways, the way most good farm decisions get made. Not from a spreadsheet, but from watching something for a long time and letting the watching add up to a thought. The thought started with a conversation. Not with an agronomist, not with an extension agent, with her mother. Her mother's name was Vera Schilling. Vera had grown up on a goat and dryland grain operation in Reno County in the 1940s and 1950s. The third of 6 children on ground that had been farmed by her family since 1904. The Schilling place was 320 acres of dryland wheat and pasture, sitting on the county line east of Pretty Prairie, with a creek bottom on the south end that got weedy every wet year and produced good grass in the dry ones. Her father, his name was Alvin, and he had come to Kansas from a German-Russian community in Nebraska in 1921 with $400 and a specific opinion about how ground should be worked. Had kept goats from almost the beginning, not as a primary enterprise, as a tool. That is the word Vera used when she talked about it years later, tool. The goats were a tool the way a disc was a tool. You put them where you needed them, and they did work, and then you moved them on. Alvin Schilling had kept a mix of breeds, some Spanish cross for meat, a handful of Nubian does for milk that Vera's mother used for cheese, and 1 or 2 Angora cross animals that her father had acquired in trade from a man in Stafford County and never quite figured out what to do with. He was not a sentimental farmer. He did not keep animals he couldn't account for. But he understood browse, and he understood that a Kansas pasture in a wet spring was full of plants that cost money if you sprayed them, and produced money if you ran the right animal through them at the right time. He had rules about it. Not written down, Alvin Schilling did not write things down, which was the one thing Vera said about him with something that sounded like mild frustration. But there were rules. The timing rule, Get the animals on the target plant before it flowers and seeds. The density rule. Enough animals to defoliate in 4 to 5 days, not enough to overgraze the perimeter. The water rule. Never let the animals range further than 200 yards from water, or they would spend more time walking than eating, and the browse pressure would drop. Vera had absorbed these rules the way farm children absorb most useful knowledge, by watching, without being told she was learning anything. She left the farm in 1962. She had not set foot in a goat pen in 56 years by the time she stood at Cora's fence line in the early summer of 2018, looking at the thistle coming up the slope, and said, goats would clean that up. Cora said the thistle had spines. Vera said goats didn't much care. She said her father had run goats on a thistle patch in the creek bottom every spring for 15 years, and the thistle never got ahead of him. She said the trick was getting them on it early, before the stems went woody. She said she couldn't tell Cora exactly when that was, because it depended on the year, and the only way to know was to watch the plant. That was the whole of the advice. It was enough. Cora did not act on it immediately. She thought about it through the fall of 2018 and into the winter, the way she thought about most things, slowly. Not urgently, turning it over. She looked things up, not online, mostly, though she used the internet some. She called the Reno County Extension Office and asked if anyone there knew about using goats for weed management. The woman who answered said she would pass the question to the livestock agent. The livestock agent called back 4 days later and said that targeted grazing was a recognized practice, and that she should look into research from Kansas State and also from some work done in the Pacific Northwest on leafy spurge specifically. Cora ordered 2 publications and read them over 2 evenings. What she learned was this. Canada thistle, before it sets seed, runs between 14 and 18% crude protein on a dry matter basis. Musk thistle is similar. Leafy spurge, the fence line problem, is lower, around 10%. But goats will take it when other forage is available, and research from North Dakota had shown that repeated browsing over 2 to 3 seasons could suppress leafy spurge stands by 60 to 70% without herbicide application. The effective grazing window for thistle control was narrow. You had to get the animals on the plants in the rosette stage, before the stems lignified and the spines hardened, and you had to keep them on it long enough to defoliate repeatedly without letting the plants recover enough to bolt and seed. It was a timing problem. Cora was good at timing problems. She bought 18 Spanish Cross does in March of 2019 from an operation going out of business in Pratt County, $74 a head for 18 animals. $1,332 total, which she paid out of the farm account with Dale's quiet agreement. Spanish Cross goats are a meat breed known for hardiness and for being willing to eat things that other livestock will not touch. They are not finicky. The extension agent who had called her back told her later that Spanish Cross was probably the right choice for this application, and that he wished he had thought to mention it himself. He had not known that she had already bought them. She put the 18 does on the northeast corner of the field on the 14th of April, 2019, when the thistle rosettes were about 6 inches across, and the musk thistle was just starting to bolt at the base of the slope. She used portable electric netting, Premier One poultry net, which she had repurposed from a previous chicken operation, running it off a Gallagher solar charger she had bought at a farm supply in Great Bend, to break the field into paddocks of roughly half an acre each. The rotational schedule she worked out herself, on a legal pad, moving the animals every 4 days when the rosette defoliation looked complete, and before significant regrowth had started. Phil Osterberg, who farmed the adjacent ground to the west and had been watching his neighbor's weedy field with the resigned sympathy of a man who knows that problems respect no fence line, drove past on the county road on the 21st of April and stopped his pickup. He looked at the goats in the portable netting. He looked at what they were doing to the thistle. He sat there for a while. He is not a man who calls his neighbors about every farm decision they make. He said later that he had learned over 30 years in Barton County that the best farming opinions are the ones you keep to yourself until someone asks. But he drove home thinking about it. He thought about it for the better part of a week. Cora ran the goats through the infested section of the field from mid-April through the first week of June, 7 weeks total, moving the netting every 4 days in a sequence that took the animals through the thistle twice and the leafy spurge along the east fence 3 times. The second pass on the thistle rosettes was important. The plants had begun to re-sprout by the time the does came back through, and the regrowth was lower in linen and higher in moisture than the first flush, which made it more palatable and nutritionally denser. She kept water in the paddock from a 275-gallon tote she moved with the tractor, and she supplemented with a small amount of loose minerals she hung in a bag from the netting post. The does gained condition. That was the part she had not fully anticipated. She had expected them to hold weight on the browse. That was the expectation from the research. What she got was animals that came out of the 7-week rotation visibly fleshed, with body condition scores she estimated at 3 to 3.5 on a 5-point scale, up from the 2.5 she had scored them at when they arrived from Pratt County. The thistle, before it hardened, was legitimately good forage. High protein, high moisture, high palatability to an animal bred for browse. They were not suffering through it. They were thriving on it. She weighed 3 of the does on a livestock scale in the barn at the end of June. Average gain across the 3 animals over the 7-week period was 14.3 pounds. She did not weigh all 18. She said later that she probably should have, for the record, but she had been too busy watching what was happening to the field. What was happening to the field was this: the thistle was going away. Not all of it. She was not under the impression that 1 season of targeted grazing would eliminate a 6-year infestation. But the northeast corner, which had been solid thistle in the bottom 8 acres, had come through the first goat rotation with a defoliation rate she estimated at 85%. The plants were alive. The root system on Canada thistle is too deep to kill by defoliation alone, but they had not set seed. They were stressed. The musk thistle at the base of the slope, which had been just beginning to bolt when the does went on, had been grazed back to the rosette stage and had not recovered enough to flower before Cora pulled the animals off in early June. The leafy spurge along the east fence was thinner. Not gone, but thinner, and the plants that remained were smaller than they had been in the spring. She called the extension agent in late June to report what she had seen. He drove out and walked the field with her. He was a careful man. His name was Ron Tillis, and he had been the livestock agent in Barton County for 9 years. And he was not in the habit of drawing conclusions faster than the evidence allowed. He walked the northeast corner twice, counted surviving thistle plants in a 10-foot transect, and said that the defoliation rate looked consistent with what the North Dakota leafy spurge research had projected for a first-year grazing trial. He said the key question was what the field would look like the following spring, after the root systems had a winter to recover or decline. Cora already knew what she thought. She was planning to run the goats again, but the question of profit was still open, and it needed answering, because profit was the thing that would determine whether any of this was worth doing again or worth telling anyone about. Cora sat down with the legal pad in early July of 2019 and worked through the numbers the way her mother had taught her to work through numbers, from the top, without skipping anything that cost something. The 18 Spanish Cross does had cost her $132. She had spent $214 on the Premier 1 netting she had repurposed, but replaced 2 damaged sections of. The Gallagher solar charger was $189, which she could reuse. The 275-gallon tote was $110, also reusable. Mineral supplement across the 7 weeks ran $43. Labor was harder to price. She had done most of the paddock moves herself, which took about 40 minutes every 4 days, and she had checked on the animals every morning, which added another 20 minutes a day. She put her own labor at $18 per hour and calculated 47 hours across the 7 weeks. Her total labor cost was $846. Direct costs, not counting the reusable equipment, $1,332 plus $243 plus $846 came to $2,435. What she got back, the 18 does, now fleshed and in good condition, went to a livestock auction in Great Bend in September of 2019. She sold them as a bred lot. She had put a Spanish buck with them in late July, and they averaged $141 per head at the sale. 18 animals at $141 came to $2,538. She had recovered her animal cost and her operating costs and come out $103 ahead on the animal enterprise alone, before counting anything else. What she was counting as something else, the northeast corner of the field, which had been too weedy to crop for 3 years, went into winter wheat that fall. 104 acres, of which 20 acres had been uncropable. That was roughly 19% of the field that had been throwing off no cash crop revenue. She seeded the corner into hard red winter wheat in October of 2019 at a seeding rate of 90 pounds per acre. The wheat germinated into clean, manageable ground. The thistle came back thinner in the spring, which she expected, and she ran the goats again in April of 2020 for a second season. The 20 reclaimed acres yielded 38 bushels per acre at harvest in the summer of 2020. At $4.82 per bushel, the price she got at the elevator in Hoisington in July, that was $183.16 per acre, times 20 acres, which came to $3,663.20 in gross revenue from ground that had produced nothing for 3 years. Against her variable costs for wheat production on that acreage, seed, fuel, fertilizer, harvest, she netted approximately $2,100 on the reclaimed corner. The herbicide program she had not run on that section of the field that spring would have cost her $38 per acre applied, times the 20 infested acres, times the 3 previous years she had sprayed and gotten limited results, $2,280 in herbicide costs she had not spent. That was not profit. Exactly. That was avoided loss, but it showed up the same way on the legal pad. She did not triple her profit in a way that would satisfy a CPA's definition of the term. What she did was convert a losing section of ground into a producing one, recover her goat investment within the same season, avoid a significant herbicide cost, and add an enterprise. The goats that she then kept and expanded because the animal numbers made sense on the farm. She had 14 does going into the winter of 2020, having sold 4 of the less productive animals and retained the best 14 breeders. She ran them on a second weedy section of the farm the following spring, a strip along the creek drainage on the south end that had blackberry cane and multiflora rows coming in, and the pattern held. Phil Osterberg asked her about it in the fall of 2020 when they ran into each other at the co-op in Great Bend. He had been watching the field. He wanted to know how the wheat had done on the reclaimed corner. She told him the yield. He did the math himself, standing in the parking lot, and said it out loud the way a farmer says something he is still working out. He asked if she thought goats would work on the bindweed he had in his south quarter. She said she didn't know about bindweed specifically. She said she could find out. She looked it up that evening. The research on goats and field bindweed was thinner than the thistle literature, but there was a Colorado State Extension publication from 2014 that suggested repeated grazing pressure in early season could suppress bindweed regrowth by disrupting the energy stored in the root system. She sent the PDF to Phil's email address, which she had to get from his wife. because Phil was not a man who gave his email address to many people. He ran a small goat trial on his bindweed the following spring. She helped him set up the rotational netting. He said the results were mixed, better in the areas where the goat density was highest, less clear on the outer edges of the paddock where the animals spread out and the browsing pressure dropped. He was not discouraged. He said he would try it again. Ron Tillis, the extension agent, wrote up the Headinga operation for the Barton County Extension newsletter in the spring of 2021. It was a short piece, 4 paragraphs, no photographs, that described the targeted grazing approach and the general results of the 2-year trial. He sent Cora a copy before he published it. She read it and said it was accurate. She did not ask to be quoted. Her name appeared once, in the second paragraph, and she was described as a livestock producer in Barton County. That was enough for her. 2 things happened after the newsletter ran. First, Ron got 3 calls in 1 week from other Barton County producers asking about the targeted grazing approach. 2 row crop operations with thistle problems, similar to Cora's, and 1 hay ground producer who had cochia coming in along the edges of his fields and was curious whether goats would take it. Ron told all 3 of them to call Cora. She did not mind. She talked to each of them on the phone and answered what she could, and said honestly what she didn't know. She told them she would rather they come see the operation in person than try to describe it over the phone, and 2 of them did, in the spring of 2022, walking the Headinga South Quarter with her while she moved the paddock fence on a cool April morning. Second, a woman from Kansas State University's Agricultural Extension Division contacted Ron in the fall of 2021, asking if the Headinga operation would be willing to be included in a broader targeted grazing study they were developing across several counties. The study wanted to track weed suppression rates, animal weight gains, and cost comparisons against conventional herbicide programs across multiple sites over 3 years. Ron passed the contact along. Cora said yes, on the condition that she could keep running the operation the way she had been running it, without modification for the study's purposes. The university agreed to that condition. They came out in the spring of 2022 with a graduate student named Marcus who was studying rangeland management. And he walked the fields and took plant counts and helped move the paddock fence twice. And he came back every 4 weeks through the grazing season. Cora has 22 Spanish Cross does now, and a buck she bought from an operation in Pratt County in the spring of 2021 that she is pleased with. The northeast corner of the field, the 20 acres that were solid thistle in 2019, has come back consistently since the first goat rotation. The thistle is not gone. It is managed. She runs a goat rotation through it every spring, earlier in the year than most people would think to start, and the plants defoliate before they can set seed, and the field produces wheat in the fall. Dale helps move the fence when he is up to it, which is more often than it was 3 years ago. He has gotten interested in the goats. He did not expect to be interested in the goats. The legal pad where Cora worked out the 2019 numbers is in the desk in the farm office. She has started a new one for the 2022 season. The Kansas State study will produce a publication eventually. Marcus mentioned it in one of his later visits, saying the data looked promising. She does not know when it will come out. She is not waiting on it. The field is producing, and the animals are gaining, and the numbers on the legal pad make sense. That is the test she has always used. Vera Schilling is 81 now. She still lives in Hutchinson. She does not use a computer. Cora called her in the fall of 2019 after the wheat was in and the numbers were on the legal pad, and told her what had happened. Vera listened. When Cora finished, Vera said, "Well, that's what we always did." Cora said she knew. Vera said, "Your grandfather would have thought it was strange that anyone needed to figure it out again." There is no good answer to that, and Cora did not try to find one. She just said yes. Because it was true. The knowledge had been there all along, sitting in a woman's memory since 1962, waiting for someone to think to ask. Not lost. Just set down, the way you set down a tool you don't need right now, trusting it will be where you left it. It was.